Okay, let's unpack this. Welcome back to the deep dive. For months, we've been documenting the ingenuity, the sheer scale, and often the brutal discipline it takes to build these massive criminal operations. We've pulled insights from the people who ran them, the people who caught them.
Right.
Today, we're reversing the lens completely.
And it's a necessary pivot. Our mission in this deep dive is to focus exclusively on failure. We are taking this whole stack of shared source material, and we're synthesizing the common patterns, the threads that lead to the collapse of these empires.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter if they were built on a crack spot in Harlem or, massive trafficking rates for the Sinaloa cartel.
Yeah.
The patterns are there.
We're looking at it from the prosecutor's perspective, how investigators actually win, how they piece the case together.
Yeah.
But we're also contrasting that with the raw, painful reality of the defendant's
The
perspective.
human perspective.
Exactly. The moments of operational error, the shocking betrayal, and, the human cost when those walls finally close in.
We have material that spans everything. High-level organized crime, massive drug rings, even what you might call white-collar prescription fraud. And the essential question, the analytical question we're really hunting for across all of it is this.
No.
Were these downfalls truly inevitable? Was it just a consequence of the game itself? Or were they the direct preventable result of clear errors in judgment, in operational discipline, and maybe most crucially, in trust?
I think that's the key. We've seen how discipline builds the empire. So now we're asking, what's that specific critical moment that signals the discipline has just evaporated, the thing that guarantees the inevitable collapse? That's the lens for today.
Let's do it.
All right, so let's start where I think most failures really begin. We're calling it operational drift. This is what happens when success becomes a handicap.
Right.
The scale gets too big, the cash is flowing too freely, and the operators, they start to feel untouchable. They start cutting corners on the very security measures that kept them out of prison in the first place.
The erosion of basic security is almost a mathematical certainty as the resources increase. Think about it this way. When you're small, you're paranoid. You have to be. But when you're moving massive amounts of product, the time and complexity it takes to maintain airtight communications, counter surveillance, clean cash flows, it starts to feel like a drag on profitability.
It's inefficient.
Exactly. The moment that calculus shifts, when protecting the money feels more burdensome than just moving the money, that is the moment the feds gain their opening.
We saw this so explicitly in the account from one drug kingpin. He started noticing these glaring signals of federal involvement, but he chose to rationalize them. He detailed how the authorities started targeting his cash shipments. They intercepted one for about $3 million, and then shortly after that, a second one for $1.8 million.
And here's the profound tactical insight. This is the little analytical nugget that separates a routine bust from a high-level case. He realized they never intercepted the marijuana product itself.
Never. They just let it go through.
Time and time again. And that is a clear, it's a neon sign. Law enforcement wasn't interested in simple drug charges. They were meticulously building a massive financial case.
Our ICO charge.
Almost certainly. It's designed not just to arrest the people, but to dismantle the entire financial infrastructure and seize every last asset.
He even said he recognized the severity. He stated this confirmed the feds were going to come. And that prompted him to try and pivot, to shift his focus to financing pain clinics as some kind of legitimate cover.
But see, that pivot is structurally meaningless unless he achieved what we'd call functional severance.
What do you mean by that?
The transition to pain clinics is only safer if he completely 100% severs himself from the residual cash vulnerability of the original crime. If he's still the one receiving or storing or overseeing that dirty cash flow, then the pain clinics are just a facade. They're part of the same conspiracy.
Which leads us right into the second fatal mistake. Bad risk management. Specifically around handling bulk cash. Money is the weak point, isn't it? It's the Achilles heel.
It is. It's either leaving a digital trail, or if it's physical, it's basically radioactive evidence just waiting to be found.
We have that one anecdote of a partner throwing away $40,000 in drug money. Just threw it in a landfill.
Yeah, and when the speaker heard this, he was initially, upset about the financial loss, of course. But then he quickly recognized that sitting on bulk cash was so incredibly dangerous, so toxic to the operation, that sometimes that write-off was simply part of the game.
A cost of doing business.
It was a cost of security. But the kingpin from the Intercept story, he failed to maintain that discipline.
And he was eventually arrested precisely because of that cash vulnerability. The DEA traced a package of cash flagged by a drug dog at a FedEx sorting facility.
A classic way in.
And when they raided his residence, they found an additional $100,000 in getaway money right next to his bed.
And that finding is catastrophic. From a prosecutorial standpoint, it's a gift. The discovery of that bulk cash at the residence, right there. It allows the prosecution to tie the cash proceeds directly back to the active conspiracy.
Which is the heart of our IQ charge.
It's the heart of it. This is why we emphasize that trying to launder money is only functionally safer if you are not actively committing the underlying crime that's generating the cash.
If you're still holding it, you're still in it.
If you are still holding hundreds of thousands in bulk, you are tying yourself directly to the most severe federal charges, and it doesn't matter if they ever catch you with a single gram of product.
It just eliminates all plausible deniability. But, sometimes this operational drift, it's not about laziness. Sometimes it's desperation born from market changes. That's mistake number 3. Poor situational awareness of a shifting market, forcing a reckless, high-stakes sprint to the finish.
Yeah, we heard this from a professional smuggler. He saw legalization approaching in California and Oregon. This is around 2009.
So he sees the writing on the wall.
He realized the entire foundation of his business model was about to be destroyed. Those incredibly high profit margins they enjoyed moving high-grade West Coast weed cross-country, they would just vanish once legal distribution got streamlined.
So this threat of market extinction.
Paradoxically, that was the force that pushed them into reckless behavior.
It forced them to level up, to move massive bulk product east, just to make millions as quickly as possible before the legal market put them out of business for good.
And that desperate high-stakes push, which was ironically driven by the specter of legitimate market forces, directly led to their demise and eventual arrest.
It's the classic golden handcuff scenario.
But accelerated by external market volatility. The operator isn't driven by incremental growth anymore. They're driven by this sense of urgency to extract maximum value before the well runs dry. And that urgency means cutting every corner, taking every possible risk.
And that's exactly when law enforcement pounces.
Every time.
And we can't overlook the most fundamental internal sign of drift, the psychological one. Mistake number 4, violating your own internal codes, like drug use.
Oh, this one's huge.
We heard that during the crack era, late 80s, early 90s, using cocaine was highly taboo among serious hustlers.
It was seen as the sign of a fool, a sucker. The kingpins who started sniffing coke weren't just engaging in self-destructive behavior. They were exhibiting a complete collapse of internal operational discipline.
You lose your edge.
You lose everything. When you are using the product you sell, you lose objectivity, you lose discipline, and your decision-making processes are immediately compromised. You're a liability.
And that applies to any high-risk business, really. You can't successfully manage a multi-million-dollar logistics operation if you're high. As one of the guys in the pimp game noted, getting high off your own supply is the ultimate breach of operational security. It guarantees instability.
It opens you up to manipulation, to blackmail, to making gross tactical errors. It's the beginning of the end from the inside out.
And that operational drift, the complacency, the lack of clean lines, it often leads right into what we call the attention trap. This is when the scale gets too big or the behavior gets too violent, and the operation goes from being a local or a regional problem for the cops to a high-priority, multi-agency federal target.
Yeah.
They just become too visible to ignore.
Absolutely. When an operation crosses a certain threshold of visibility or violence, they stop being a simple criminal enterprise, and they become a political problem.
And political problems bring in the big guns.
They bring in the federal alphabet soup, the DEA, FBI, IRS, all of them looking for a significant political win, a big RICO prosecution. Flashy behavior basically turns your criminal activity into a case study.
The audacity of the flashy operations in the oxycodone pill game is a perfect example of inviting that kind of attention. This empire operated using legally licensed doctors and dentists, trying for a veneer of legitimacy.
A very thin veneer.
But they pushed the boundaries constantly and openly. We heard they even ran a full-page ad in Flex Bodybuilding magazine.
Which is illegal, just flat out illegal, because you're advertising the product for body enhancement purposes, not medical necessity. Just think about the level of arrogance it takes to run a full-page ad in a national muscle magazine while you're running a massive prescription fraud ring.
Unbelievable.
They weren't just looking for customers. They were publicly flaunting their willingness to violate the fundamental laws that govern prescription drugs.
And the sheer volume of it guaranteed attention.
Yeah.
They were facilitating this massive fraud by accepting fake police reports from addicts who would claim their pills were stolen,
Right.
which would allow the doctor to legally prescribe more based on that supposed theft report. The scale of this and the public visibility, I mean, lines of hundreds of addicts visible from the street, it transformed it into an undeniable high-priority federal target.
It becomes a public nuisance, and that has severe financial implications that make prosecution inevitable. But the lesson isn't just that they got caught, it's how they got caught. Chris George's operation, for instance. It attracted scrutiny not just through the volume, but through the visible affluence. You had employees driving Ferraris, other high-end cars. These aren't just details, they are indicators of asset streams that the IRS and the DEA can easily target and seize.
Which further justifies the federal intervention.
It gives them the whole case on a platter. Volume plus visibility equals unavoidable downfall.
But sometimes the attention isn't about luxury cars. It's about excessive destabilizing violence that upsets the delicate balance of the criminal ecosystem, like we saw with the Zetas.
Yeah, and even in what you might call lawless Mexico, the Zetas were deemed to be doing way too much.
To use some context here.
The Zetas were started by former Mexican special forces. They brought a level of military precision and an extreme brutality that was previously unseen in the cartels. The former elite commander Sombra, who worked against them, he described them as the narco version of ISIS.
Operating with no rules, no mercy.
None. Their extreme violence kidnapping police officers, soldiers, even Marines, plus those horrific propaganda videos of them cutting throats. It wasn't just tactical intimidation, it was systematic destabilization.
And Sombra's unit, they realized that the terror they were generating had crossed a critical line.
A critical line.
Right.
The level of brutality was so extreme that, according to the source, there wasn't enough bribe money in the world to allow them to keep operating. The violence wasn't just criminal anymore. It became a declaration of war against the state itself and against civil society.
And that forced the authorities to act.
It forced them to act regardless of the corruption in the system because the social and political cost of ignoring it just became existential.
That's a crucial distinction. Violence is supposed to serve an operational purpose, right?
Yeah.
Territorial defense, internal discipline.
Exactly.
When it becomes propagandistic and excessive, it loses its function and just invites a disproportionate unified state response.
Yeah. And that same principle of violating core unwritten codes applies even in the mafia's decline. A critical internal failure that signaled the mob was losing their minds was when members began killing for profit and for debt.
It disrupted the whole honor code.
It completely destroyed the internal honor code that supposedly governed their structure. The whole contract of the mafia was built on structure, loyalty, controlling rackets.
So when money and debt became the primary justification for murder,
Everything fell apart. We heard from a mafia enforcer who recounted that his captain, Dominic, killed a man simply because it was easier than giving him the $250,000 that he owed him.
unbelievable.
That one act broke the fundamental rule. You don't kill for personal financial gain or debt. Once that rule is broken, every single associate knows they are expendable if they become a liability, a debt, or anything else.
And that creates the justification for betrayal later on.
Of course! If the leadership is breaking the fundamental codes, why should the followers have any loyalty to uphold? It's the beginning of the end.
So if operational drift opens the door and flashiness rings the bell, then betrayal is the party that walks right through and changes the locks. The cooperating witness, the informant. It's maybe the single most devastating factor in the downfall of these operations. It leads to mass indictments and just shattered lives.
Trust is the ultimate vulnerability of any hierarchical criminal organization. These structures are built on an assumption of absolute silence and loyalty, and it's enforced by violence. But when one cooperating witness flips, especially someone high up, that structure instantly becomes an existential threat. It flips the entire power dynamic from the criminal enterprise back to the government.
And we're seeing this happen right now at the highest levels of the cartel world. In the ongoing internal war between Los Chapitos, the sons of El Chapo, and their rivals like El Mayo, the source reveals this massive shift.
What's that?
Major players close to Los Chapitos are now trying to get deals with the DEA because they are genuinely scared.
Wow. And the DEA is actively trying to capitalize on that fear and operational uncertainty. They aren't just passively accepting a surrender. They're turning these defendants into high-value intelligence assets.
We heard they're asking for key operational intelligence. For example, the current location of Ivan Arcovaldo, one of the most prominent Chapitos figures.
And that shows you that cooperation is not a passive plea for leniency. It's an active intelligence war where the target is always the top leadership, and the incentive for the person cooperating is pure survival.
The mafia offers equally intimate and devastating stories of turncoats. You take Joe Barron, the mafia informant. He operated as a high-level spy, but what's notable is he never wore a wire.
Okay.
He provided critical information, including saving a judge and an assistant U.S. attorney from a hit that was ordered by his captain, Dominic.
So you would assume, right, that saving federal officials from a murder plot would grant him significant leverage, maybe even immunity.
You would think. But the sources reveal the cold, transactional reality of the investigative mindset.
What happened?
When Barron was arrested later on some stupid charge, the FBI agent, Michael Gator, he essentially dismissed his previous heroism. He confirmed that the FBI is only concerned with numbers.
Busts.
Successful federal busts and securing ICO prosecutions. Heroism means nothing if it doesn't lead directly to an indictment against the higher-ups.
That is a brutal lesson. The government doesn't care about your soul or your good deeds. They care about the volume of indictments you can deliver for them.
And the rationale for cooperation, especially among mafia figures, is often framed as self-preservation combined with some kind of moral justification.
Right, like Sammy Gravano. He famously cooperated against John Gotti and Paul Castellano, and he justified it by saying Paul broke so many rules himself, including that strict mafia rule against drug dealing.
So he reframed it.
He reframed cooperation as a necessary evil to save John and his crew from Castellano's dangerous rule-breaking leadership. It's the ultimate cognitive dissonance. You're packaging betrayal as organizational loyalty and high moral ground.
But the problem goes way beyond the top echelon and the famous bosses. The most intimate betrayals often come from those who are closest to the heart of the operation.
Family and associates.
Exactly. This is the true domino effect in action, where loyalty gets tested by massive federal charges.
And it often fails that test.
The highly successful pot smuggler, the one moving huge amounts of cash in VCRs.
Yeah, shipped through the mail.
His entire downfall was orchestrated by his own family. His sister's husband was informing on him. That's what led directly to those crucial intercepted VCRs full of $100 bills.
When family turns on you, there's no one left to trust. The foundation is gone.
And we see similar patterns in local and regional operations. The Virginia kingpin, his lengthy sentence was cemented by the betrayal of his friend Cody.
What did Cody do?
Turned himself in and testified against him, and falsely claimed the kingpin was the one who pulled the trigger. Another related associate also took a plea deal to testify, so you have multiple corroborating witnesses, ensuring maximum possible damage.
And this just highlights the immediate, absolute leverage the federal system has. We heard that story of a drug dealer who, when he was picked up by the DEA, was offered a straight walk out of the office.
If you would do what?
If he would help them get Maria, a cartel member, the government immediately calculates the value of the intelligence they can gain. It confirms that actionable, high-level information is infinitely more valuable to them than one low-level bust.
And the result of all this mass cooperation is what we call the mass indictment.
Yeah.
A female gang member described her entire operation just collapsing in a massive federal sting. It involved 75 people in her case alone. Agents were raiding 70 other houses at the same time across the city.
The scale of that operation is definitive evidence of a massive pre-existing cooperating witness network, one that had been systematically gathering evidence for years.
It's terrifying.
It allows the FBI, the DEA, and local task forces to take down whole organizational charts in one single coordinated sweep. The Chinese gangs, they face the exact same fate. The FBI came down and took them all out. It's the worst kind of mathematics. Once one person talks, everyone else rushes to cut their losses.
And they all feed the federal dragnet,
which dismantles the entire infrastructure overnight.
So once that trust collapses and the indictments are handed down, we move into the devastating reality of the end game. The arrests themselves, and then the brutal mathematics of federal sentencing. The goal for the authorities is always maximum impact.
These arrest scenarios are rarely peaceful, even if the defendant is expecting them. The authorities, they aim for these high-impact arrests to maximize the psychological shock and send a clear message.
The kingpin we discussed earlier, he was arrested really quickly after that FedEx package was traced by the drug dog. DEA agents found his $100,000 in getaway money.
And that instantly escalates the seriousness of his operation in the eyes of the agents on the scene. It's no longer just a drug case, it's a major trafficking organization.
And you can contrast that with the confessions of a cartel smuggler who walked into a planned meeting with his lawyer, already knowing he was on the federal radar and expecting the worst.
He said the agents wanted to take me out.
Yeah, implying a high-tension, high-stakes environment where agents were prepared for violence. His decision to cooperate immediately upon entry was a stark strategic move made under the absolute pressure of immediate incarceration or, potentially worse.
Then you have these surreal moments of just communication breakdown. We heard from a California gang member who was already in county jail on some unrelated state charges.
Yeah, okay.
He's sitting there watching TV in the pod when he sees himself featured on Crime Stoppers because his probation officer couldn't find him.
Wow.
That breakdown between state and federal oversight shows just how quickly things can escalate when a unified federal indictment drops. It can surprise the defendant even while they're already locked up.
The psychological surrender often comes before the physical capture. The former Aryan Brotherhood member who described that encounter where a rival pulled a gun.
And instead of seeking cover, he ran toward the shooter.
Exactly. And that illustrates a profound fatalistic mindset, a kind of self-destructive burnout that's common right before a full-scale collapse. He had reached the point where he was welcoming the end.
And the brutality of federal sentencing. I think this is maybe the most shocking aspect of these downfalls, because the system is designed to ensure the time served matches the sheer scale of the alleged conspiracy, not just the product they physically seized from you.
It relies heavily on the concept of relevant conduct.
Let's talk about that, because this is where the legal system stops making sense to an outsider. The oxycodone kingpin is a prime, devastating example. He was never caught with one pill.
Not a single one.
Yet he received a 60-month federal sentence for conspiracy and possession with intent to distribute.
And that sentence was based entirely on informant testimony and a drug ledger they found somewhere else. A ledger detailing 580 kilos plus 2 kilos they caught with an associate.
Right. And in the federal system, particularly under the sentencing guidelines, relevant conduct allows the prosecution to calculate the total drug weight of the entire conspiracy, not just what you touched, and attribute that entire volume to you.
Provided the informants are deemed credible.
Exactly. Hearsay and association carry the weight of physical evidence, and it translates directly into decades of prison time.
Mike Dowd, the former corrupt cop, he faced this head-on with severe REO charges. He was initially offered 34 years in a plea agreement,
which he rightly called a life sentence at 31. And that wasn't based on physical evidence of him having drugs, but on the volume of the conspiracy his lawyer calculated, something around 500 kilos that passed through the ring.
And the prosecution leverages those mandatory minimums and the harsh guidelines to force cooperation or secure these life-altering sentences.
The system is designed to break defiance and ensure institutional control. It's a numbers game.
The Virginia cocaine kingpin, he was facing a 20-to-life sentence. He ultimately took 32 years, the low end of the guideline, but only because his family was granted immunity.
That's the agony of it. The exchange of decades of your own freedom for the safety of your family. It's a common, agonizing calculation at the end of the line.
And the terror of betrayal doesn't stop once you're serving time. We heard that story of an inmate with only 10 days left on his sentence who was murdered on the order of the Mexican mafia La M.
10 days left.
10 days. The reason was that a guard toed on him, snitched for writing letters to an underage girl. Despite his imminent release, there was no consideration.
And this just illustrates how the internal prison politics and codes of conduct often supersede any external legal sentence. Being a perceived snitch, or even just being associated with one, demands immediate retribution. It doesn't matter how much time you have left to serve.
The criminal justice system takes away their freedom.
But the internal prison system dictates their survival.
Which leads us to this crucial philosophical question. Were these runs destined to end in prison? Or were strategic exits actually possible? We hear these stories of immense wealth and success, yet so few operators successfully walk away and stay gone. Why is that?
Often, the criminal structure itself creates what you call golden handcuffs. Once you reach a certain scale, the operation requires constant maintenance. Scaling down or exiting is virtually impossible without incurring massive financial losses or, exposing yourself to rivals who will quickly fill the vacuum you leave behind.
The successful marijuana smuggler is the perfect illustration of how external forces can lock you in. He knew legalization was coming. He had a perfect market-based exit ramp right in front of him.
But it was also a ticking clock.
Right. He needed to extract millions before his black market disappeared, and that forced him into that high-risk bulk transportation operation that led directly to his downfall.
He was facing market extinction, but the business required too much capital and infrastructure to just shut down gracefully. I mean, who manages the payroll? Who collects the debts? That massive final sprint he needed to satisfy the golden handcuffs, that was his undoing.
You see it with Eric Norrie, too. He had $4 million in product arriving the day of his arrest. He was constantly reinvesting, constantly scaling up. He was trapped by the massive infrastructure he had built.
Exactly. And for those who survive capture and incarceration, there's a surprising reluctance to exit the lifestyle entirely. The former Irish-American gangster, he admitted that selling drugs in prison actually made his time easier.
That confirms a deep-seated psychological barrier, doesn't it?
A huge one. The criminal economy provides high stakes and relative ease of income. It creates a strong comfort zone, even inside prison walls. They struggle profoundly with the reality of responsibility outside.
The mundane grind.
The mundane grind of legitimate life. Mortgages, health insurance, the quiet struggle for incremental success. The high-risk life feels normal to them, and normal life feels unbearably boring and complicated.
So the true break in the criminal cycle, it requires a complete mental and physical overhaul. It's not about just serving the time. It's about a psychological reset.
Yes. One ex-criminal serving time in a Spanish prison finally got sober and had what he called an epiphany. He asked himself, how did I end up here? I'm not like these people.
And breaking the addiction cycle was the key.
It was the key to breaking the criminal cycle. Sobriety allowed him to see his environment and his actions with clarity, to realize the path he was on was destructive. That internal clarity is the only true exit ramp, but very few seem capable of finding it while they're still in the game.
And then there's the highly transactional mindset that often prevents an exit. One trafficker who served 18 months, he stated that making $1 million at 24 was absolutely worth it to do the time.
If he could have kept the money.
Exactly.
And that calculation shows you that for some, a prison sentence is just a calculated business risk. It's a fair price to pay for the financial reward. It only becomes a deterrent if that reward is stripped away through asset forfeiture and fines. If they keep the money, the time served is just a business inconvenience.
Finally, the power of time itself is used as a tool of management inside, which speaks to the psychological reality of those serving long sentences. Prison guards know that giving inmates something to lose, the prospect of parole or a reduced sentence, it helps manage the whole system.
The insight from the guards is profound. Give somebody something to lose and they'll quit acting like they have nothing to lose.
It confirms that violence and defiance are often direct responses to the lack of future prospects.
Inevitability is often linked to the psychological belief that there is no meaningful future outside of that criminal identity. When you take away that future, they revert to a survival mindset that is highly, highly volatile.
That brings us to the internal cost of the life. The paranoia that precedes the fall and the often unexpected emotional release that sometimes comes with capture. Running an empire built on violence and debt. It's a relentless psychological burden. It grinds down even the most hardened operator.
The state of constant, high-alert preparedness that you need for survival eventually just turns into full-blown paranoia. The mafia associate, he was constantly worried about his captain, Dominic, especially after Dominic killed a man over a $250,000 debt.
So he had to be careful.
He had to be perpetually careful what he asked, careful what he said, knowing he was always potentially next if debt or even just suspicion was involved.
And that fear of being the next victim, it doesn't stop once they're inside. The Virginia Kingpin described the agonizing uncertainty of waiting for parole, dealing with inmates who had intentionally taunt him because they knew he was under pressure and desperate to go home.
The system, both the criminal elements and the institutional ones, it exploits that mental vulnerability mercilessly.
And then comes the moment of realization, the shock and often the relief of capture. We heard from a former kingpin who, after being moved to a maximum security prison, witnessed a murder on his first day.
His very first day.
And this trauma was so profound, seeing the raw, unglamorous violence of the inside, that he felt his erred life was gone forever.
He described it as the only real time that I felt like dying. That moment, witnessing that murder, it finally severed the mental ties to his criminal past and whatever glamour he had built up around it. The arrest, and the shock of max security, it became a strange form of psychological relief because the weight of constant operational paranoia was finally lifted.
For others, the psychological response is just pure grinding defiance. A defendant facing federal charges, he viewed the indictment process as a prolonged game where investigators were trying to break me and grind him to dust.
And his only recourse was to try and stay strong by insisting on going to trial, refusing to give the prosecution the satisfaction of a plea, even when the evidence was completely overwhelming.
That defiance, it connects back to the fatalism we discussed earlier.
It does. The Aryan Brotherhood member who ran at a shooter. He described reaching a point where he thought, if I was to die doing something, I think that people were better off.
That's a classic sign of burnout.
It's self-destructive fatalism, where the person views their own existence as a net negative and they welcome the end, whether that end is death or decades in a federal facility.
And yet, amidst all this psychological turmoil, there's a practical, immediate response to survival that's taught inside the walls.
Yeah, the jailhouse lawyer. He taught others to survive by focusing entirely on the moment. Forget about the past, don't worry about the future, forget about whoever ratted on you. The only thing that matters is survival.
That's fascinating. It's a radical form of presence, of mindfulness almost.
Necessitated by the maximum security environment where every single moment requires hyper-awareness and planning. It replaces the chaos of the outside world with the rigid, predictable structure of the inside.
You're trained to jettison all external psychological burdens.
Guilt, future plans, revenge, all of it. You focus only on the immediate necessities of existence. It's how they cope with the magnitude of the time they're facing and the betrayal they suffered.
We started this deep dive by asking if the collapse of these empires was inevitable or if it was preventable. And what we found today is that operational drift isn't a single error. It's the gateway that guarantees the attention trap, which in turn feeds the catastrophic informant domino effect.
We've seen 3 interconnected patterns of collapse across every single type of criminal enterprise. First, complacency. Ignoring surveillance signals like cache intercepts, failing to achieve that functional severance.
Right.
Second, the attention trap, where the sheer scale or the rule-breaking violence, whether it was the mob killing for money or the Zetas engaging in that counterproductive brutality, it guaranteed intervention from the federal alphabet soup.
And finally, the catastrophic failure of trust. The size of the empire determined the ferocity of the downfall. You move from local police to the DEA, FBI, IRS, all of them eager to secure a big bust fueled by scared, high-level cooperators.
The whole system is designed to leverage human weakness for massive results.
The stories we analyzed today, from the oxycodone kingpin, sentenced for 580 kilos he never even touched, thanks to relevant conduct, to the pot smuggler betrayed by his own sister's husband, they all underline the same terrifying truth.
That these systems are inherently fragile. They're built on human error and on a very, very tenuous trust.
We often discuss the massive profits and the operational power of these ventures. But the common thread we found is that success breeds 2 things: arrogance and vulnerability.
The arrogance leads to the operational drift, and the vulnerability is immediately exploited by the federal system.
So the only way to stop that spiral of inevitable downfall appears to be severing the ties completely and then surviving the psychological war of incarceration.
So what does it take for a person to reach that point of epiphany, where the life stops being worth the risk? Is it the sight of a murder on your first day in max security? The realization that you're running toward a shooter? Or is it just the quiet horror of watching a young boy ride a go-kart outside your Virginia prison cell, reminding you of the simple life you forfeited? That is the real final calculation these individuals are forced to make.
And usually it's a calculation they can only perform after they have already lost everything.